my son had a social studies lesson today at school about the Constitution. I'm just learning about it and understanding when it was signed, who signed it, what it meant. And part of it was getting into some of the content of the key themes or principles of the Constitution. A lot of the preamble, right? We the people, the whole intro section, and talking about things of like that it's a government ruled by the people as opposed to a monarchy where one person decides everything, and the people decide. They pick their leaders, they decide what happens. And with that, a lot of talk, a lot of emphasis on freedoms and liberties and how things are meant to be equal and fair for everybody, and that people are born with certain rights, and like in the Bill of Rights, and everybody gets those freedoms and liberties. And that's what makes America so special, and that's why we broke away from England and all those things. And I found myself as I was listening to it, saying, okay, I understand what they're teaching, but wondering, are they going to address the elephant in the room? Are they going to address, this is a second grade class, but are they going to even introduce the idea that freedom wasn't there for everybody? We didn't get it right in the beginning, right? On paper, the concepts were great, and they were as amazing as he's being taught. And in a lot of ways, it was unbelievably revolutionary and changed the history and trajectory of the world for the better. But with that, we still didn't get it right. Slavery existed, a horrible, disgusting institution. And although we conceptually could understand how important freedoms were and that men should be equal, we didn't practice that initially, even for women, the way they were treated and the rights that they had. And it's interesting because, normally in the past, and I think other people have this sentiment, you could go a few different ways with that. You can go, hey, they're not old enough yet to understand that, or you shouldn't teach them those complex topics, and you're going to teach them to hate America, and you have to be careful of that. And I would understand all of that. And, my inclination might have been to say, yeah, later on you teach that. When they're older and they can understand it, you teach them that, because you don't want to kind of poison their mind too early with the ideas of racism. That's risky. It might be bad. There's too many bad outcomes that can come from that. And you could see somebody from either side kind of being fears around how you teach that, right? On the one side, it would be, don't teach any of it because you don't want them to hate America and they can't understand it yet. And the other side, it would be, hey, tell them the absolute truth. Like, America was broken and there are horrible things, and slavery was disgusting, and the Constitution was bogus, right? You could see people having both extreme views. And my inclination, as I say, might have been to just avoid it, to say, wait till they're ready. That's the answer. That's how you bridge those views. You don't just hide it. You don't brush it under the rug, but you wait until they're capable of understanding it. But I think that's wrong. I think that's a mistake. And the way I approached it with my son today was to really try and talk to him about some of that nuance. Obviously, at his level as a 7-year-old, not with all the details, but trying to get him to understand at an early age that life is complex and there is nuance to things. And much like me and him talk about people, that there's some good people and some bad people, but sometimes good people do bad things, sometimes bad people do good things. It's not always cut and dry. The same is true for a country. And there are many amazing things, as I mentioned, that in the video mentioned, that our forefathers did and that America was built on. But we also did have this huge, horrible mistake where we just got it wrong. And I want him to understand that. And I want him to understand it, because it's true, and I want him to be sensitive to the fact of that and not blindly think or incorrectly think that America's always been perfect and that, there was no issues for anybody and life was just great, because that's not true, and he should be sensitive and understand that. But I also don't want him to be shocked by it down the road. I don't want him to feel betrayed and feel like, hey, what else did they lie to me about? Like, what's the truth here? And then become jaded and cynical about America and think that everything is bad as kind of a compensation and a reaction to him. I want him to be able, when he hears about it later in life, whether it be from a teacher, whether it be in just casual conversation with friends or a history book or a movie, I want him to be able to process it and say, it was complex, right? And if somebody says America's the greatest country that ever existed, everything's perfect, I want him to be able to say, hey, I get there was a lot of positives, but there was some really horrible stuff too. And vice versa. If somebody says America's terrible and everything about it's disgusting, I want him to be able to say, hey, I get that. There are some really terrible things, and slavery being obviously one of the biggest, if not the biggest, but there was also some really good things. So it's complicated. I want him to have that capability. And I think it's not just that I want him to have it. I think to do it effectively, to really combat racism and the issues we face in society today, you have to do it at this younger age. Right? I like to think, I think others do as well, you wait until they're more ready, but in that time that you're waiting, their mind is all the flaws of the mind that we talk about are taking effect, right? Even if you try and do it all right, you try and teach him, about love and equality and all those things, just inherently in how we function as a society. And I've talked about it in other videos, the power dynamic at play, and him as a white child, there's going to be aspects of it that just he can't appreciate, he can't see, right? Call it white privilege, call it what you will. I don't care so much for the terms of it, but there's going to be aspects of it that he's not going to realize, right? If it's not taught to him explicitly, his mind is going to do the things that it does, and it's going to assume things are the way he sees it through his lens, and he's going to assume the things he learns in school are absolutely true, and he's going to, assume a lot of different things about the country and about the history and people and historical figures. And I want him to have the tools. I want to give him the tools and the ability to understand the nuance of that from a young age. I want him to process that early so that as those flaws of the mind would normally start to kick in, he's already preempted that. I've prepared him, and he's been prepared in some ways to deal with it much earlier on, as almost a barrier and a shield from some of those biases and things that could come up. And I think that's the way you do it. I think you address it. You address it age appropriately, and you try and give it its right just due and nuance, but you address it. And you have faith in the trust in them to understand the complexity of the topic. And you give them a fighting chance, frankly, right? You give them a fighting chance to understand the truth and to process it themselves and make their own decisions about it objectively. Not try and convince them it's one way or the other. Not give them bits and pieces and then eventually they find out more or less. Give them the information. Give them the guidance and let them decide and understand what's good and what's bad.